I never thought a simple trip to the grocery store would end with me crying in my car, wondering if my existence was an eyesore to the rest of the world. But there I was, listening to a group of teenagers laugh about my weight, and my skin like I wasn't even a human being standing 3 feet away from them. Have you ever been looked at with such genuine disgust that you actually started to believe you were the monster they saw? Or have you ever felt like the world had decided your worth before you even opened your mouth? I need you to tell me honestly if you would have stayed quiet like I did, or if that would have been the moment you finally snapped, because what I did next, the way I transformed my entire life and essentially forced every single person who ever mocked me to swallow their words, is something I still can't believe actually happened. Growing up, I was never the girl people looked at twice, or if they did, it was for all the wrong reasons. I struggled with severe hormonal acne and a thyroid condition that made keeping weight off feel like trying to hold back the ocean with a plastic bucket. By the time I was 22, I had become an expert at being invisible, wearing oversized hoodies in the middle of summer, and keeping my head down so I wouldn't have to see the pity or the mockery in people's eyes. My own family wasn't much better. My mother would constantly remind me that my cousin was getting married, and that I should probably try a new fad diet, so I could fit into a bridesmaid dress without looking like a disaster. Those words, disaster, unpleasant, lazy, they become the soundtrack of your life when you don't fit the standard, and eventually, you just start dancing to the music. I worked a dead-end desk job where my boss would pass me over for promotions because he said I didn't have the polished look required for client-facing roles, even though I was doing twice the work of the girls he did promote. It was a cycle of rejection that felt inescapable. Every morning was a battle with the mirror, a long session of trying to layer foundation over cystic acne that felt like fire under my skin, only to look in the mirror and feel like I was painting a crumbling wall. I remember one specific day at the office when a group of coworkers were planning a beach trip. They went around the room inviting everyone, but when they got to my desk, the ringleader, a girl named Sarah who looked like she stepped out of a fitness magazine, just stopped. She looked at me, then at her friends and said, "Oh, I don't think this is really your scene, right? It's going to be a lot of photos and, well, bikinis." The silence that followed was louder than any insult. I just nodded, pretending I was too busy with my spreadsheets to care, while my heart felt like it was being shredded. I went to the bathroom and sat in the stall for 20 minutes, gripping the edges of the sink until my knuckles turned white. Why was my body a public topic of discussion? Why did my skin determine my social standing? These questions haunted me as I drove home that night, only to be punctuated by the grocery store incident. I recall walking through the aisles, my basket filled with kale and quinoa because I was trying yet another diet, when I heard the giggling. A group of 4 girls, no older than 17, were huddled by the cereal aisle. One of them pointed at my face and whispered loud enough for the entire store to hear. Imagine waking up and seeing that in the mirror. I'd literally never leave the house. They didn't even look away when I caught their eyes. They just smirked. That was the moment my internal dam broke. The turning point was that day at the store, but it wasn't just the teenagers. It was the realization that I was participating in my own disappearance. I went home, looked in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't see someone who needed to hide. I saw someone who was being bullied by the entire world, including herself. I decided right then that I wasn't going to change for them, but I was going to change so much that they could never ignore me again. I started small, just walking, then joining a gym where I hid in the back corner for 3 months until I felt brave enough to move to the weights. I saw a specialist for my thyroid. I learned about nutrition not as a punishment but as fuel. And I started a strict skincare routine that felt like a ritual of self-love rather than a desperate attempt to fix a broken face. But the physical part was only half of it. I started a blog, then a social media account, documenting the raw, ugly truth of the process. The days I cried on the treadmill, the days my skin flared up so bad I wanted to cancel my life, and the days I felt like a fraud. I didn't want to be another perfect influencer. I wanted to be the girl who showed the sweat, the purge phase of the skin treatments, and the mental breakdowns. I remember posting a photo of my face at its absolute worst, red and peeling, and captioning it, "This is the middle of the bridge and I'm not turning back." That post went viral. It wasn't because people wanted to mock me anymore. It was because they were seeing themselves in my struggle. My following didn't just grow. It exploded into a community of people who were tired of being told they were before photos. We were all during photos, and that was okay. I began detailing the psychological warfare of weight loss, the way people started treating me better as I got smaller, and how much that actually disgusted me. I wrote about the phantom fat I still felt, the way I would still reach for a size XXL shirt even though I was now a medium. I shared the bills from my dermatologist, the reality of loose skin, and the terrifying anxiety of entering a clothing store without fearing the sales associate would tell me they didn't have my size. My platform became a sanctuary for the unpolished. And as the numbers ticked up into the hundreds of thousands, I realized I had accidentally built an empire out of my own insecurities. As my platform grew, I started getting invited to local podcasts and small workshops. I remember the first time I had to speak in public. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. But as soon as I started talking about the pain of being invisible, the room changed. I realized that my vulnerability was my superpower. However, the more successful I became, the more the ghosts of my past tried to haunt my present. I started getting emails from old high school friends who had spent years making my life a living hell. One girl, who used to leave Pro-Ana tips on my locker, sent me a 5-paragraph message about how inspired she was by my journey and how we should definitely grab coffee and collaborate because she was starting a life coaching business. The audacity was staggering. It wasn't just her. It was the neighbors who used to whisper when I walked my dog, and the teachers who told me I should focus on behind-the-scenes careers. They all wanted a piece of the light I had fought so hard to find in the dark. My mother's tone changed too. Suddenly, she was bragging about her famous daughter at her bridge club, conveniently forgetting the years she spent trying to hide me from the neighbors. I remember a family dinner where she leaned over and told my aunt, "I always knew she'd be a star, she just needed a little discipline." And I nearly choked on my water. The discipline she was talking about was the years of self-loathing she had cultivated in me. The internal conflict was massive. Part of me wanted to scream at all of them, to remind them of every cruel word and every cold shoulder. Another part of me felt a strange, hollow pity. They hadn't changed. I had just become someone they couldn't afford to lose. I spent many nights wondering if I should just ignore them, or if I should use my new voice to set the record straight. I realized that success is a magnet for parasites, and I had to learn how to set boundaries that were made of steel. I started filtering my messages, blocking anyone who had ever contributed to my trauma, and focusing solely on the women who were currently where I used to be. I started a confidence camp online, a place where we focused on mental resilience first and physical health second. I was becoming a role model, but the weight of that title was heavy. I felt like I couldn't have a bad day, like I couldn't eat a burger in public without someone filming me to see if I was relapsing. The pressure to be a perfect symbol of transformation was almost as bad as the pressure to be invisible. To my absolute shock, people started following. Thousands of them. It turns out, there are millions of people who feel judged, discarded, and ugly by society's ridiculous standards. My platform grew faster than I could keep up with. And suddenly, the disaster was becoming a voice for the voiceless. I was getting messages from young girls saying I was the reason they didn't skip lunch that day, or women my age saying they finally felt beautiful because of my posts. But as my profile rose, so did the shadows of my past. People from high school, the same ones who called me names, started sliding into my DMs, acting like we were old best friends. My former boss even reached out, asking if I'd be interested in a brand ambassador role for the company that once told me I wasn't polished enough. He had the nerve to say, "We always knew you had that special something. We were just waiting for you to find it." I almost threw my phone across the room. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I was being offered the very things I was denied when I needed them most, but now they were being offered as a transaction, not as a recognition of my humanity. I started to see the world for what it truly was, a place that only respects you when you have the power to benefit them. This realization didn't make me bitter. It made me sharp. I knew that I had a platform now that could either be used for vanity or for a very specific kind of justice. I began planning something bigger, something that would address the systemic cruelty of pretty privilege, and how it destroys lives before they even begin. I spent hours researching the psychology of bullying and the way corporate environments weaponize appearance. I wanted my message to be more than just love yourself. I wanted it to be respect others regardless of what they look like. I started drafting a manifesto, a set of principles that I would live by and teach. I realized that my face was no longer just mine. It was a billboard for a movement. And as the date for the national summit approached, I knew that this would be the stage where I would either cement my legacy or be torn back down by the very people who built the pedestal I was standing on. I was at a crossroads where I had to decide if I wanted to be the bigger person, or if I wanted to deliver the kind of justice that people usually only see in movies. I had been invited to speak at a massive national empowerment summit, the kind of event my old bullies could only dream of attending. And I found out that some of the people who had been the cruelest to me were going to be in that audience, including the girl who led the laughter at the grocery store that day, who was now working as a junior event coordinator for the summit. I saw her name on the itinerary and felt a cold shiver go down my spine. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was fate handed to me on a silver platter. I spent weeks preparing. I didn't want to just look good. I wanted to be undeniable. I worked with a stylist to find an outfit that didn't hide my body but celebrated it. I practiced my speech until the words were etched into my soul. I wasn't going there to give a generic believe in yourself talk. I was going there to hold a mirror up to every person who ever thought they had the right to judge a book by its cover. I kept thinking about the power dynamic, how she would have to hand me my microphone, how she would have to ensure my water was cold, how she would have to serve the person she once treated like trash. The irony was poetic. But I also struggled with the guilt. Was I being petty? Was I descending to their level? I had to remind myself that accountability isn't cruelty. If she was never confronted with what she did, she would keep doing it to others. So that's the situation I was in, standing on the edge of the ultimate comeback, while staring down the people who tried to break me. Before I tell you what I said on that stage and the absolute chaos that happened afterward, I want you to pause and comment below. If you had the chance to publicly call out every person who ever made you feel worthless, would you take it? Or would you let your success be the only noise you make? Do you think silence is strength, or is silence just another way of letting them win? Would you look them in the eye and say their name? Or would you walk past them like they never existed? Standing backstage, my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, wearing a tailored, vibrant suit that screamed confidence. My skin was clear, my body was strong, but more importantly, my eyes didn't look down anymore. When they called my name, the roar of the crowd was deafening. I walked out, and the first thing I did was scan the front rows. There they were. The popular crowd from my hometown, looking up at me with a mix of awe and visible discomfort. They recognized me, but they couldn't reconcile the woman on stage with the girl they used to torment. I didn't start with a thank you. I started by describing in vivid detail the day at the grocery store. I described the exact words those teenagers used, and I watched as the girl in the audience, the one who was now an event coordinator, turned pale, realizing I was talking about her. I didn't mention her name, but I described her laugh, the way she pointed at my cart, and the way she made me feel like I was taking up too much space in the world. I talked about my boss, describing the polished look conversation, and I saw several people in the industry section shift uncomfortably in their seats. I didn't hold back. I talked about the nights I spent wishing I could peel my own skin off, and the way the world rewards cruelty as long as it's wrapped in a pretty package. I went further, describing the emails I received from friends who only wanted to know me now that I had a blue checkmark next to my name. I called out the hypocrisy of a society that demands perfection but punishes the process. I told the story of how I used to sit in my car and cry until my vision was blurred, just so I could gather the courage to walk into a building. I shared the specific insults: beast, whale, pizza face, and I saw people in the audience start to weep. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The room went pin-drop silent. You could have heard a feather fall. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It wasn't the weight of my body, it was the weight of their expectations. I went to the hotel bar afterward, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care if people were looking at me. I ordered a drink, sat by myself, and felt truly deeply at peace. The aftermath was even more intense than I expected. The clip of my speech went viral on every platform. I was called a hero, a role model, and a force of nature. But more importantly, the company I used to work for faced a massive internal investigation after other employees came forward with similar stories of appearance-based discrimination. Once I opened the door, my former boss was let go, and the company issued a public apology, though I didn't accept it. My mother finally sat me down and gave me a real apology, not for how I looked, but for how she failed to protect me. It wasn't a perfect ending, because life isn't a movie, but it was a real one. I realized that my transformation wasn't about the mirror, it was about the boundaries. I started a foundation that helps young girls deal with bullying and body dysmorphia, and every time I see one of them stand a little taller, I feel like I'm healing that 22-year-old girl in the grocery store. I've since written a book, and it's become a bestseller. I've been on talk shows and magazine covers, but none of that matters as much as the messages I get every morning. I got a message recently from a woman who said she wore a swimsuit for the first time in 10 years because of me. That is my true success. I still have bad days, I still have breakouts, and I still have moments where I feel like that girl in the oversized hoodie, but now I know how to talk to her. I know how to tell her that she is beautiful not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. My life is completely different now. I'm a full-time advocate, I have a thriving community, and I wake up every day feeling like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I no longer wear oversized hoodies to hide. I wear what I want because I want to be seen. The people who judged me? They're still stuck in the same small-minded cycles, chasing the next trend, while I'm traveling the world telling people that their flaws are actually their greatest strengths if they just stop apologizing for them. The moral of this whole mess is that people will always try to put a price tag on you based on your packaging, but you are the only one who knows the value of what's inside. Don't let a temporary opinion create a permanent insecurity in your soul. If you've ever been judged, if you've ever felt like you weren't enough because of how you look, please know that your glow up is coming, and it starts the second you stop believing the lies they tell you. True beauty isn't something you put on, it's something you stop hiding. It's the light that comes from knowing you survived everything meant to destroy you. Like this video if you were on my side and believe that the best revenge is living a life they can't even touch. Subscribe for more stories like this where we turn the tables on the people who think they can break us, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far at the summit by calling them out? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.